Okay, we need to begin the session, so good afternoon all and welcome to session 3 at this year's ASA conference. The title of this session is entitled Action at Farm Level to Deliver a Sustainable Future Food System. My name is William Minchin and I'm the recently appointed CEO of the Agricultural Trust. At today's conference we have already heard a robust outline of the challenges facing us in terms of reducing emissions by 25% by 2030. We've also heard how to address the challenge as a sector and how the consumer and wider society is driving the agenda. After this morning's plenary session, I was inspired by Jack Bobo to change my introduction. He talked about how we need to stop planning for the future and start creating it. And it led me to an analogy, a sporting analogy. And really the scenario we now find ourselves in this sector. So, in terms of a sporting analogy, the pitch is lined and the pitch is mowed. The training is done by the teams. The tactics are set. The referee is in the middle of the field with a whistle in their mouth. The crowds have gone through the turnstiles and are in the stands waiting for the game to start. But no match takes place without the players. We do not meet the target set out of 25% without the farmers in this industry. We can talk all we want about MAC curves, feed additives, new technology, but is the support network there in place to help farmers adapt and implement the mitigation measures required? So in this session, we're very focused on solutions and how to implement these solutions by supporting farmers. I'm joined today on the panel by 3 esteemed speakers. First of all, Dr. Stan Lalor, Director of Knowledge Transfer with Teagasc. He has responsibility for advisory and education activities and programmes. Prior to this role, Stan has significant experience working in the private industry in the agri-supply sector. He graduated from UCD as a BAg in animal and crop production, followed by a Masters in Soil Science, and later completed a PhD with Wageningen University. Barry Larkin is the CEO of the Acorn Independent Merchants Group, which represents a group of independently owned agribusiness merchants. He graduated from UCD with a BAg, followed by a Master's specialising in crop science. And lastly, but far from least, Gillian O'Sullivan is a graduate of veterinary medicine from UCD and worked in practice for a number of years before changing to dairy farming with her husband Neil in County Waterford. I've been on her farm and it's a very picturesque, beautiful farm and very well operated. They've been milking once a day for the past 15 years. She's also a graduate of the Dairy Herd Health Certificate Programme through UCD School of Veterinary Medicine and recently just completed a certificate in soil health and water management through South East Technological University. At this stage, would you join me in giving them a warm welcome? Okay, so I'd like to begin by asking you to give a quick introduction and also your perspective on the overall challenge in terms of reducing the emissions by 2030 and specifically in terms of solutions we can implement as a sector to meet the target. So I'll begin with you, Stan, if that's okay.
Okay, thanks William and good afternoon everybody. Maybe just to begin with your sporting analogy, this session is very much focused about what we can make happen at farm level. And while it's a good analogy in terms of the immediacy of the challenge, I think one thing we want to be careful slipping into is the idea that we're all in a stadium looking down at how the farmers perform. And at the outset, I think it's something, a lot of talk this morning about the enabling of farmers and supporting farmers. We're all in this together and everybody is depending on it to the same extent. We're looking at how food is produced, but we're all dependent on that as well. So while it's a good analogy of the immediacy and there's something about to happen, I think we just need to be careful about how our perspective develops about how we see farmers in this journey. The other thing about the game beginning to start, sorry folks on the analogy William, but you kicked the ball in to use the pun. I always go back and fundamentally look at sustainability and I think we do need to bear in mind the holistic context of sustainability all the time from 2 perspectives. First of all, we always talk about the economic, the social and the environmental. And for sure, we're going to focus a lot on the environmental, have focused on it, and we'll continue to focus on it. But we shouldn't lose sight of the economic and the social as well. And also, within that, a lot of certainly within Teagasc, when we look at sustainability, we talk about the importance of innovation around those three in terms of the ongoing development and coping with, the new ideas and the journey all the time in terms of coping with sustainability. And also, I think it's important to recognise that while, yes, we have challenges on the environmental sustainability side, which are monumental and relatively new in recent times, the idea of sustainability, which means can we keep doing what we're doing, or keep, our objective as a sector is to produce safe, nutritious food at the point that we deliver the margin. That's still our objective. The difference is the way in which we have to produce that is evolving all the time, and that's evolving in terms of what's happening now with the environmental, with the increasing focus on environment that we see all the time. And what that means for farmers, I guess. Traditionally we focused on food from the point of view of the volume output, and added value and things like that. But now how that food is produced is just part of the product. It's becoming part of the product and will be part of the product, and that's what we're facing in terms of trying to cope with that. What does that mean, or how do we react to that? Well, that means we've heard a lot of talk this morning, both from the industry and also from other input in relation to, I suppose, the whole verification and what food means in terms of metrics and verified standards and so on, and what both consumers expect to get, maybe what they're willing to pay for is another argument, but what they expect to get is becoming more and more clear in terms of the focus and the demand for these environmental credentials. But what essentially we need to happen in terms of the supply chain is, as an overall sector, we're dependent on what happens at the level of each individual farm in terms of the response here, in terms of the footprint of our food production, and in terms of how we can relate that back in a way which we can put evidence behind the standards we have in food production in the country. And that needs action at farm level, and that's the bottom line. And that's why farmers are so important as a player in all of this. So that brings us back to farmers in terms of help and support, and that's certainly in my area in Teagasc, we're very focused on in terms of seeing how we, whether it's through education, whether it's through an advisory service, whether it's through our knowledge transfer activities, research or so on, how can we help and enable farmers and support farmers to do that? And what's required there, I suppose, at a high level? I suppose the first thing, it's the roadmap, or where the appropriate clarity, whether it's the appropriate policies or whatever, that we know what we're aiming for, we have a clear target. Now, there was contributions this morning, I suppose, challenging the fact around how that's created. Do we create the future, or do we follow a future? I think that there was some really good insights there, but that clarity of what we're aiming for, or however it's developed, is really, really important. Within that, there comes in the appropriate regulation, but also comes in appropriate reward. And what can we be rewarded for, and maybe what do we need to regulate or comply with afterwards? And the balance of all of that, I think, for farmers is a tricky space to navigate, and they need help and support to do that. The clarity on the journey, certainly, I suppose the amalgamation of an awful lot of the research effort in the MAC curve that is developed. It's presented as a very, I suppose, scientific document. It takes a lot of teasing out in terms of to understand it, but at the same time, it is the fundamental foundation for a roadmap in terms of the technologies and the emission factors that will count as scores on the board when it comes to the inventory, when it comes to knowing what to do in terms of trying to get to where we need to go, particularly in the greenhouse gas side. But farmers need confidence in that journey, and key as well to that is we need not just technologies, we need uptake and adoption, and that's where farmers need confidence to engage and support to engage, that they can take on the technology and know where it's going. To do that, we need consistency of messaging. We need consistency across the sectors. That's where the existing signpost programme is very important. Signpost, a collaboration across a wide number of industry actors, an awful lot of players, but an awful lot of I suppose, the vision of that programme is a collective and consistent message in terms of where we're trying to take the sector overall, where the farmer's role, where the industry role is in doing that, and the buy-in of all of those partners is a massive resource for the industry in terms of a platform in which to have that collaboration and that message formulation. There's obviously huge roles for advisors, both Teagasc advisors, private advisors, all have a key role to play. Anyone influencing the farmers, and through the agribusiness network as well, all of that needs to be consistent, and people need to be on the same page. And fundamentally then for the farmer, I think one of the big changes, certainly in the last 12 months, that has switched the dial completely for farmers on this, is there's been a massive buy-in to what is an industry challenge. And farmers now are really asking the question, okay, I get the challenge at an industry level. What do I need to do? And the individualisation of that, what we can achieve as a sector is the sum of the actions at the level of each individual farm. And farmers need help in terms of the building of awareness, the individualisation of the challenge. Okay, I understand where the sector is in terms of emissions, but I don't know where I am on my farm. What tools can we put there on that? And what supports then, when you understand what actions are needed on an individual farm, well then what help can be given to do that? And that's where the development of new tools, such as the AgNav platform, the collaboration between Teagasc, Bord Bia and ICBF, is exactly there from the point of view of trying to help a farmer understand their own figures. And then the signpost advisory programme that is being developed and has been launched this year is the next step in that, in terms of once the farmers understand those actions that are required on their farm, we put in the help and support to give them to be able to go that journey then and implement those actions and have whatever help and support they need to do that.
Okay, thanks, Dan. We'll come back to some of those points. Barry, can you give us your perspective, please?
Yep. So I suppose I'm here representing the Acorn Independent Merchant Group, but specifically I'm to talk about the tillage sector here today, because there wouldn't be too many voices for the tillage sector. But just to give a bit of background for the tillage sector, it's a sector that would be a minority, about 350,000 hectares, year in, year out. It was probably on decline from the early 2010s. And it has started to increase again in the last couple of years, but we're talking small single-digit figures here. It has a huge role to play, in my view at least, and in many within the tillage sector's view, going forward as to where sustainable agriculture or sustainable Irish agriculture is, or where the end goal is for sustainable Irish agriculture. There are many credentials associated with tillage. It is by far the lowest emitting sector. It is second in profitability in term to dairy production. So if we could, I suppose, join up the dots with a lot of the challenges on the livestock sector with what benefits can be taken from the tillage sector, we might have a more holistic approach. We've heard some very good speakers before me at least, and some of the comments that were made. Jack Bobo made a very important point about local versus global. Impacts are local, but benefits are global. I suppose as an overall agricultural industry, we experience our impact at a local level, but it's not right that we cap our production here for it to be displaced by a less efficient system in another part of the world. But in order for us to minimise our impacts here, I think we need to have more synergies at least between sectors. And the news yesterday that came out from Brussels or from the European Commission in terms of the derogation is probably just going to drive the land market even more crazy than what it has been in the last 12 months. I suppose that was kicked off predominantly by the nitrates regulation in terms of the banding of the dairy herd. And where the dairy sector had to try and get more land was predominantly from the con-acre land market, which was historically taken up by the tillage sector. That is just going to be further compounded in the year ahead if we don't have, I suppose, policies in place to safeguard the tillage sector. But the synergies in play could be between beef sector and the dairy sector, where someone has joined up thinking there, or specifically for the tillage sector, it's a very carbon efficient industry that could offset some of the carbon that's produced from the other sectors. And I suppose what I mean by that, the tillage is probably the only sector that has the possibility to be carbon positive. Currently, there's about 1.3 tonnes of CO2 equivalent produced per hectare in comparison to the other sectors, which is way higher. Another comment that was made earlier was from Jim Bergen, and policies need to be made looking through the lens of a farmer. I understand what happened yesterday was to do with water quality, but that is going to have a detrimental impact on the arable area going forward. The credentials associated are not just related to greenhouse gas efficiency or greenhouse gas emissions, but in nitrogen utilisation. Now, a tillage crop has the ability to utilise up to 70% of applied N, in comparison to grassland, which is about 30. I stand corrected on that, but somewhere around 30. So it makes sense for us to at least maintain production. ring fence what we have there, and not for it to rot away in the corner like what has happened in the recent past. We have some of the best dairy farmers, some of the best beef farmers in the world in Ireland, but we also have some of the best arable farmers. We have the ability to produce the highest yields of wheat and barley right across the world, which is something we should be proud of and something we should probably make more use of. The biodiversity is another hot topic in the overall sustainability argument or topic. But if the whole country becomes a grass field, how diverse is that? At least if there's an arable field in the middle of it all somewhere, at least we can maintain other parts of our natural biodiversity to the country. There are measures that tillage farmers can improve or implement to improve their sustainability credentials. And I suppose a lot of these would be related to regenerative agriculture, like what was touched on earlier. But I suppose some of the more simple ones would be chopping straw, correct soil pH, strategic applications of nitrogen, and utilising, I suppose this ties in with the synergies of other sectors, utilising organic nutrients from heavily stocked livestock farms. So I suppose the policies need to be put in place to safeguard the tillage sector and tie in with the other sectors, the other livestock sectors, and in how we can alleviate some of the problems on their farms.
Okay, so you're looking for synergies between enterprises. Gillian, your perspective, please.
Well, I'm going to take a different tack here, I guess, just from the two lads. I'm going to say, as the only farmer here today on the stage, I think it's really, really important to understand farmers' perspective, and because we have 130,000 farmers in the country, and to understand how we implement solutions, you have to understand farmers, and you have to understand, I guess, my story is how am I sitting here today? And I guess that's because if you'd said to me 15 or 20 years ago, you'll be sitting in front of, at the ASA conference, you'll be talking about implementing sustainability measures at farm level, I would have been like, Jesus, it's not on my radar. And that was because at the time I was living and working in Dublin City. I was living right beside Dundrum Shopping Centre, with that type of carefree life where I couldn't have given, a flying squirrel about any environmental measures, to be totally honest. So it's obvious that a very transformative change happened between then and now for me to be sitting here and to be talking about sustainability measures. And I guess that happened with one thing, which was, unfortunately, my brother, who was farming at home, he passed away suddenly at the end of 2008. And our farm facing into 2009 was left with quite a significant hole in it in the shape of my brother. And that's when, and I don't know if anyone remembers 2009, it wasn't a great year for dairying, but it was the year that both myself and my husband, who's also a vet, decided to give up our lovely safe jobs up in Dublin and to come home and learn how to dairy farm. And that was a serious learning curve there and over the last 15 years we've developed a dairy farm. We're milking about 100 crossbred cows on a very, very steep slope overlooking Dungarvan Bay. And the thing was, because we have a science-based background, that's how we applied our learning to design our farm system. Everything was, we would go towards the research, we'd go towards the researchers, we'd go towards the academics, we'd find best practice and try and implement that at farm level. And over the years, as mentioned earlier, my husband only finished his Master's in Environmental Sustainability 4 weeks ago. I've done an extra 2-year course in UCD on herd health. I finished another course last year in WIT on soil health and water management. And that continual, in reality, we're obviously nerds, the pair of us. But it is quite unlike other farmers, we figured out, because they don't like to read the dairy articles or dairy journals or veterinary journals to really soak up that knowledge. And I guess when we put all of that into practice, it meant that it informed how we were farming in a way, and that's why I'm sitting here today, is because when it comes to solutions, when it comes to implementing solutions at farm level, on our farm we've probably tried and tested almost everything. So it gives we've great perspective on how to dairy farm in the best and most sustainable manner possible. And I'm really, during this discussion, I hope to get into the depths of and to touch on how we are employing these methods on the farm, how industry and policymakers can help farmers out in bringing solutions in, and how research can also help to work with farmers in implementing solutions and finding solutions to put into practice at farm level.
Excellent. Thanks, Gillian. So, Stan, I'll give you the first question if that's okay. You mentioned the AgNav platform. In terms of carbon counting and the whole development there, where does that fit, or what exactly is it?
Yeah, so I suppose at the outset you'd have to recognise that the interest that this is, what's been spoken about in terms of what we heard from processors this morning and so on, the development of tools and the development of, I suppose, the concept around counting emissions, counting carbon, whether it's balances or emissions or whatever, that's a very active space, and there's a lot of development of tools that are on the go at the moment around that. One thing that's very important, and I suppose where we approach this in terms of the collaboration with ourselves, with ICBF and Board BIA, was, I suppose, recognising that to try and develop a tool basically that would align itself to what I was saying was the challenges earlier in relation to that issue of how a farmer can understand where their individual farm is in relation to their emissions profile, what might be the appropriate actions, what would be the effect of those actions, and so on. And one of the key things that I think we set out as an objective in the development of the AgNav tool, which is we have a workable product, but it's still under development and will be. It has a lot of potential into the future for future development. But one of the key aspects was, I suppose, a single source of truth for farmers was something which was a very important objective. Linked to that was something, and it came up in a lot of the discussion this morning in relation to the effort we could end up spending in the next coming years. A huge effort could go into collecting and working with data, and less spent on the actual impact of what we're actually trying to achieve with actions. And I think that's something which is a very important point to bear in mind in terms of what we're asking farmers to do and how we verify that in terms of ease of administration and so on. But I suppose the collaboration we have with Board BIA, and particularly with ICBF, was very important from the point of view of trying to make as efficient as possible a use of the data that's currently existing as possible, and also so that any numbers that are produced are as accurate as possible in terms of the most up-to-date, whether it's models coming through from the Teagasc research, whether it's the data that's available through the Department of Agricultural Systems, ICBF and so on, or whether it's related to what other data is being associated with quality assurance assessments and things like that Board BIA would have. So that efficient use of that data is very important in terms of an objective as well.
Just on that, Stan, if I can interrupt you. So it's great to hear that, I think everyone will be delighted to hear Board BIA, Teagasc and ICBF are working together on that data project. But I know from my previous role that there's a number of other, I suppose, marketing companies. Even we heard Nestle earlier on in session 2, and they're all working on different tools. So some are working on the Cool Farm tool, others are using the ECO2 tool from Alltech, which I'm familiar with. Is there a risk there? And also, we're one country within Europe. We could end up with 10 other different tools that are all carbon counting and essentially doing the same thing, putting the same information in and getting different results.
Yeah, no, that's a massive risk, and I suppose the risk of that was exactly one of the reasons behind the idea of the development of AgNav, because with any tool, you can put in any algorithm you like in terms of the calculation of a figure, and you can put in any data you like in terms of what data is used to calculate that figure. But what we would be very focused on is, when we're asked, whatever we're going to ask farmers to do or support farmers to do, it needs to count on the scoreboard. And the scoreboard that is really important is the national inventory. And actions or technologies that can be implemented. A big part of the research we do in the background in Teagasc and across the entire research community is about building the scientific data behind the tools that are available, that those emission factors, whether it's emission reductions, are verifiable, and we can stand over those in terms of the emissions reductions that they have. And the idea behind AgNav is that those technologies that we have, that will count in the inventory, and that they are the technologies that we know are calculated accurately based on the right data for the farm, is what AgNav is attempting to achieve, so that it is that reliable source of data with respect to actual, when a farmer is looking at numbers and confused about which number is the truth. What we're trying to create with AgNav is a one-stop shop for that in relation to those figures. And then with AgNav, not just to look at the figures, and from, again, going back to the idea of the individualization of the challenge for an individual farm. That's what we're trying to achieve at AgNav, So the farmer is no longer looking at the industry challenge. They can see, okay, my farm is structured this way. This is my enterprise mix. This is my stocking rate. This is the way I'm using inputs. This is how I'm spreading my slurry. This is how I'm feeding my animals. This is how I manage my tillage crop. That you can see, okay, if that's the way it's being done, based on the true data behind that farm, this is what we know the emission factors are, whether it's at an absolute level, whether it's per hectare, whether it's per unit product, but that's the figure. And then you can see with the tool, we're also developing a way, well, okay, if I now take a mitigation measure or an action on the farm, so I'm going to reduce my nitrogen input through increasing clover, or I'm going to feed animals differently, or spread my slurry differently, you can see, okay, well, that will make this difference. And it gives the confidence then to the farmer to say, right, that means if I do that, I know what difference it's going to make. When I'm down in the pub on a Saturday night and I'm telling my neighbours who think farmers aren't doing anything for greenhouse gases, I can say, hold on now, I have done this and I know what it's doing on my farm. And also, the generation of that simple action plan, which after all those figures are generated, what does the farmer need? He's getting up in the morning and going out to do their jobs. He or she needs to know, okay, what is the thing I need to do? And that's where a simple action plan comes in. And that's what AgNav is producing as an output for the farmer as well. And the simpler that can be for the farmer, the better.
Yeah. Okay. So we're still measuring, okay, we're looking at return on investment from implementing certain measures. Mike Tyson once said, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. We have a very clear plan, but actually how do we go about implementing that plan at farm level?
Yeah. There's filing cabinets all over Ireland filled with paper with environmental objectives. Whether it's from schemes or action plans or whatever, and that's what we need to do something differently this time around. And that's what the Signpost Advisory Programme, falling in behind AgNav, is setting out to do. So what we are recognising is it's fine to do a plan for the farmer, and it's fine to come to a workshop or have a meeting with an advisor and come up with, it might be a simple plan on one page, which is 3 steps, but those steps are not always easy to implement, and that's what we need to be very aware of, and we need to give farmers a fair chance to take on board actions like that and implement them and support them where required. Some things to do are relatively straightforward. If you make a different decision on what fertiliser you buy, it's a decision at the point of purpose and the decision is made. It's in the yard and you spread it. But then there are other things that are more complex. How do I adjust my system if I'm going to reduce the age of slaughter on my cattle? How am I going to how does incorporating more clover change my mindset in terms of how I'm going to manage the grazing rotation, things like that?
To interrupt you, aside from Signpost Farms, what else are we specifically doing? Like if we think back to EBI, was probably the biggest change ever happened, in terms of communicating and knowledge transfer on Irish dairy farms. It was a fantastic initiative for the industry and made a huge change in terms of our performance. That was done through discussion groups mainly, in my understanding. So and very quickly now, other than the Signpost farms, what else are we doing?
So with the Signpost Demonstration Farm Programme, I think it's important to recognise as well, like we're putting additional resources in Teagasc into a Signpost Advisory Programme that is putting a specific emphasis on people focused on the challenge, I suppose, that's created by greenhouse gas emissions, right? And that's what that programme is about. We would have had previous programmes related to, or ongoing programmes related to other areas such as ASAP for water quality and other initiatives as well and other programmes. I do want to recognise, it's not like we were never working on climate before. One of the things I think which is really important, it has come out and we need to continually emphasise it, is there are a lot of farms in very good positions in terms of their adoption of actions already. That has come about through the everyday advisory activities, working through the industry, working through groups, joint programmes, working through individual one-to-one advisory contacts. That's ongoing as well. But with the Signpost Advisory Programme, I suppose we're putting an additional layer, I suppose, to highlight the specific focus on greenhouse gas emissions specifically in the context and linking in and integrated into the overall work that would be going on an ongoing basis, both internally within Teagasc, but also through our reach with our partners in the industry, private advisors and so on.
Okay, thanks, Dan. So Barry, I've paraphrased your introduction based on really you're looking for synergies between enterprises and specifically between dairy and tillage. Can you elaborate and give us some examples of what you mean there?
Yep. I suppose we are trying to achieve quite a significant goal, though it'll probably never be an end goal. Sustainability will always be ongoing, but if we could have a more holistic approach in, I suppose, what Stan is talking about in the Signpost Farms, in tying the whole thing together, more joined up thinking that was said earlier, but where, like I said, the synergies where I suppose, the calf from the dairy sector going into the beef sector. Synergies whereby we best utilise the native grains and, I suppose, explore how that can reduce a livestock carbon footprint. The tillage sector would have been pretty much an afterthought in many of the groupings in the last, I suppose, 15 or 20 years. Now, I suppose I am talking a lot about the tillage sector because I'm tasked with doing so. I do represent many other sectors as well. But the tillage sector would have been an afterthought in many cases. In terms of the signpost farms, it was beef and dairy, I suppose, because they were bigger emitters, were more preferential in their treatment, but tillage has come in thereafter. But it would be good to see if in the signpost farms that how each one can tie into the other in terms of reducing the overall carbon from Irish agriculture in general, not just the specifics. We don't want to be accused of going tunnel vision of one sector versus the other, because then we're going to find ourselves in a big mess. I suppose how best we can arrest the situation that has arose with the derogation, going from 250 to 220. There's over 3,000 farmers going to be affected there. And another synergy that would be the movement of nutrients, those organic nutrients, from a surplus on a livestock farm who are in derogation to a deficit on a tillage farm, and grow our crops from there.
So in the past, on that one, because I think you're skirting around it a little bit, in the past, dairy farmers did not want to remove nutrients off the farm or their organic nitrogen off their farm. You're suggesting now that you want a facility between dairy farms and tillage farms which have a deficit of N.
Yeah, and in fairness, I think that is something that is being explored, at least in the background, in the recent couple of months. But this might just be the trigger to make it happen, to roll out a scheme or to incentivise it or to highlight the benefits of doing it. Because, let's face it, if the derogation comes in its proposed form, like I said, it's going to target the Con Acre, or derogation farms are predominantly in the area where arable production is, and it is dairying, at least in the recent past, has been a more profitable enterprise.
Okay, so you
and
think
that's going to target the tillage land.
That's a mutually beneficial solution.
Correct.
That's going to come from the table today. Okay. So regenerative agriculture was mentioned earlier by Jeroen from Nestle. Tell us what that means specifically from an arable production point of view.
So that man in Nestle probably would be better briefed on regenerative agriculture now than me, but at the same time, there are in tillage farming, it is probably best suited for a simple regenerative agriculture approach, whereby there are some farmers in this country that are classified themselves as regenerative farmers, and they're doing a really good job. They would be not only carbon efficient, but they would be carbon positive. They'd be putting carbon back into the ground, and I suppose, having spoken to a few of them, the more simple the approach, the better. Where you have a good rotation of various crops that can be utilised on the island of Ireland, and that, including in that, you would have crops that would be good for the soil, crops that would be nitrogen-fixing crops, crops that can be utilised in feed mills, and then utilising cover crops. So it's a holistic approach again. But in terms of regenerative agriculture, again, that can tie in with taking in nutrients from a livestock farm, utilising whatever is surplus in those farms on the tillage farm.
Okay. Okay, so Gillian, to move on, Stan has a plan. Barry wants your nutrients, and you're a dairy farmer. What have you done up to now in terms of trying to reduce and hit that 25% target in terms of implementing mitigation measures on your farm?
I think that probably the phrase that farmers can't be in the red if they're to be in the green is really, really important to say first, because farmers, in order to have the headspace to implement any mitigation measures, they can't be wearing through an overdraft. So, that type of pressure, they need to have time space to implement new measures in the farm. And for us, for myself and my husband, we've probably gone through this whole different thought process over the last couple of years to implement measures in our farm. But first and foremost, we had to start with the economic side of things, because as I said, you're not going anywhere unless you're making a buck. So we looked at the three big, the three big influences on profitability on an annual basis. And number one being market and inflation impacts on the farm. So that's obviously in terms of, for us, in terms of our milk price and our input cost prices. And secondly, it would be to look at Mother Nature, because Mother Nature will really impact. Weather extremes will hugely impact on profitability on a farm, especially if you've got a dry summer. You don't have the opportunity to produce enough forage or to feed to feed your livestock if you're in a drought situation, and equally so if you've got a very, very long housing period. And third, the third one then is the direction of policy, and why that is. And it's a controversial one at the moment, especially going off what was announced yesterday, but what is the direction or trend in policy? Because policy really influences farm profitability. And when we look at that, the direction is from EU level, from all levels, from national level, the direction is towards reducing nitrate and reducing emissions, or reducing nitrogen usage and reducing greenhouse gas emissions at farm level. And when we think about that, yes, we have the 25% reduction target that is set, set for agriculture. And that doesn't mean that if or when we meet that 25% reduction target, that we can, crack a load of can onto the back of the tractor and increase our stocking rates. What's beyond 2030? People are talking about carbon neutral, net zero. It's not like we reach 2030 and go back to how we were. So the trend is, in terms of policy, is towards reducing emissions and reducing nitrogen usage, or increasing nitrogen use efficiency at farm level. So when myself and Neil looked at that in altering our farm system over the last couple of years, we said, right, how does that work in with remaining really profitable? And when it came to market prices, it was like, so if we have a very high, so if we maximise our milk price, which we do when we're milking once a day because of you've that solids component which pushes milk price up, well, then you have to have a very low cost base to increase that margin. When it comes to Mother Nature, then you have to, we decided we would stock our farm to a level that would reflect the average grass growth over the previous 5 years. That would take in a degree of ups and downs with weather variability. And in doing so, we also tightened up any passengers that were on the farm. So in terms of replacement rate, we went really tight on just the replacements we need. That's all, so no surpluses. And then when it comes to policy direction, and in terms of nitrogen usage, we really targeted our nitrogen usage. We've changed the type of product we're using. We're using considerable amount, yes, less than we have been in the past, and that's through just differing our application rates and looking more towards utilising the nutrients that are already on the farm. And when we put all of those together in combination with things like increasing clover on the farm, so we have maybe a third of a milking platform in really, really high quality clover swards, as well as multi-species swards. We have probably a further 25% that is oversown. And that again is a work in progress. But just to reference what Stan was saying in relation to the AgNav programme, I've been working with the guys in Teagasc, and we put in our figures to see what progress we'd made in a space of 5 years. So we put in our figures from 2018, and we put in our figures from this year. And at this point of the year, what the figures to see out the range of the year, it's fairly set in stone. There's not going to be huge variability in them. So what we've had is a reduction in emission intensity of 23% over a 5-year period. And emission intensity is is your carbon footprint per litre of milk. And I know that that's not the top line figure, because we're talking about, when it comes to national figures, it's the absolute figures of greenhouse gas emissions that we want reduced. But for our farm, we managed to reduce our absolute emissions in 5 years by 18%. And that's absolutely whopping. So that gives us another 7 years to get to that 25%. And as I said, it's a work in progress for us. We've gotten this far already, and we already can see a pathway through, again, improving our, there's scope on the farm with clovers and things like that to, again, push that further. So, I think in terms of addressing the sustainability challenge, or addressing the greenhouse gas emission challenge and the challenge with regards to nitrogen usage, we're certainly looking at it on the farm here and making progress.
Excellent. So just in terms of research, and there's a lot of companies in the audience here who are investing in new technologies and new solutions to help you meet this target. I don't think you're a low-hanging fruit. I think you're quite progressive and have done an awful lot on your farm already. And I don't think Stan is probably going to have to target much more low-hanging fruit than you. But for us to meet our target, we need to go on again and push on again to the next level. So what research can be done by the companies in the audience here, or from Teagasc and Department of Agriculture, to help you meet those targets?
Yeah, in terms of research, I guess we can get back to more about how industry can help, but in terms of research, I think there was probably, there's certain areas that are really going to help farmers implement mitigation measures, and maybe there's a certain, and it was mentioned before, about a level of preparedness for what's coming. And if we look at what's coming down the tracks over the next 30 years, from the Met Éireann website, Met Éireann publications, we're going to have hotter, drier summers, longer periods, prolonged periods of dry weather, and wetter winters. And how are we preparing ourselves to deal with that? Because 2018 seemed to take all researchers by surprise, because when it came to advice that was given out, maybe the incorrect advice was given out around fertilizer usage, and everyone will put their hands up now and say it, and we'll, learn and move on from that. But maybe we should be looking, maybe more forward-looking in being prepared for the next time something like that kicks in, so that we have more tools in the toolbox for farmers to deal with these extremes. Like, I know extremes, we're saying we've had the hottest June on record, we've had the wettest July on record, and this week it's now the hottest September on record in terms of temperatures reached. So it's, we're gone from farming in balance to farming weather extremes, and weather extremes has a massive impact on profitability. So again, just maybe more of a heads up looking towards, like, just for example, looking at tillage sectors in other areas of the globe, they're utilising things such as at sowing, mycorrhizal fungi, seed treatments, and this is peer-reviewed science in terms of establishing crops that have a degree of drought resilience built into them because of this network that is forming underneath the soil, which helps with nutrient absorption and helps scavenge water. Maybe we could look down lines of that. Otherwise, in terms of research, I feel that when I'm farming this length of time, it has only been in the last 2 years that the word soil is mentioned at farm discussion groups. And before that, it was basically you farmed a bog, you farmed in Cork, or you farmed in light soils, and that was kind of it, and all the great land is in Cork or Tipperary. So there was no nuance to it, whereas there is huge level of nuance when it comes to soil type, soil structure, soil health in general. And I start to bring it into we take a lot of farm discussion groups, and we start to bring it in. Farmers are generally very interested in it, because it brings to life how, if you have a sandy soil versus if you have a silt or clay loam type soil, because a sandy soil has larger grains, it has a lower surface area and therefore less capacity to hang on to nutrients, versus the absolute opposite in a silt soil. And nobody knows that, farmers don't talk about that, but it really does impact on nutrient supply in terms of our grass growth. And when we look at dairy farming, you have the 3 pillars of dairy farming: your grass, high quality grassland management, you have your cows, excellent EBI and genetics, and you have your farm managers who have to be excellent at what they do. But if we really just focus on the grass comes from that natural resource of soil, and it is just so ignored. And we could go into depth with farmers that soil provides 50% of the nitrogen supply to our grass crop through the pool of organic matter that's in the soil. Maybe those pools, that 50%, isn't available to every farmer because of structural problems within the soil, because of compaction, because of all of these issues that we do not deal with, and we don't talk about either. So it's really important that if we could bring the focus, and we have excellent scientists, soil scientists across the country in UCD, in Johnstown Castle, and if we could bring them more to the fore and get them talking to farmers and get them interested in what's going on under our feet, I see it as a real gateway towards farmers engaging with our natural resources on the farm, being air, soil, water and biodiversity.
Perfect, thanks Gillian, and Stan will be delighted to hear you talk about soil science with such passion. Stan, farmer confidence in the journey towards us meeting the target is going to be really important. I heard Una ask a question earlier. Una Sinnott has a publication which she presented at that conference around social distrust and concerns of farmers and so on. It's an important part of the journey, isn't it?
Yeah, and what we're asking, or what is going to need to happen across farms is it's going to underpin what we can achieve as a sector. So I mean, there's no doubt about it that the targets are very challenging, and we know that. But and the targets are real. They're not, they're in national legislation and so on at this stage. It's not an option but to take this really seriously. That's all been said, that's well established. I suppose in terms of farmer confidence, there's a few points to make. I think first thing that I think is really, really important, the way, I suppose, the whole maybe social influence on I suppose, the narrative around it and the thought process around it and information availabilities and so on, I suppose, is evolving at a rapid pace, and the way in which people get information and are interpreting information is changing very quickly, I suppose, compared to what would have been, we like to think, was reasonably stable maybe a decade ago. But one thing that I think we should, really never lose sight of is the critically important role of independent science in the whole piece here, and not just speaking for Teagasc in relation to the research that obviously is ongoing in our organisation, but there's a huge body of research in other research providing organisations, universities and so on. You mentioned the private sector and a lot of research capability and research capacity in there as well, William, and rightly so to point that out. All of that has a contribution to make, but that underpinning and that trust in science, I think that there's two really important, fundamentally important things we need to really work hard to protect. One is the trust that is in that fundamental science, and secondly, the amount of it being done, so that we have the verification and the proof behind the technologies that are coming through. And that's certainly within the research in Teagasc we're very focused on, and I know all the partners across the sector in research are focused on the same thing. We're fortunate with research as well. We have an awful lot of work done, and there's a lot of things. I mean, when Teagasc set out to do their climate strategy and I suppose a roadmap towards 2030 in the first instance, and let's not lose sight beyond 2030 of what the target is to 2050. Like 2030 is relatively short term. 2050 is still there, and climate neutrality, certainly at a national level, is what the target is. So it's not just going to stop in 2030, it's going to keep going. But when it came to looking at how we take 2030 as the first step, there are a lot of technologies with improved uptake that will get us some of the way, but we need an awful lot more technologies to come through the system. Some of them are in development. More of them, we probably haven't even dreamt them up yet, but the research capacity there to do that is going to be very, very important. I think in terms of farmer confidence as well, I think one thing from the point of view of winning over that farmer confidence or cultivating that farmer confidence is, I think, a lot of reference this morning, I suppose, to agriculture, particularly farmers maybe feel oppressed by the narrative that's going on around of all of this. And, any mechanism we have to highlight what is going on that is already good on farms. Gillian has highlighted an exemplary example there, the thought process behind the assessment of how we'd even go about looking at what impact the nitrous derogation or greenhouse gas emissions would have on the farm, the thought process around that, the teasing apart of the actions. A lot of farmers have done that, a lot of farmers are doing that on their own with the help of good advisors doing that as well. So, but we do need to acknowledge that and highlight that. We see it ourselves coming through. I mean, one of the things that Teagasc has really focused in on in the last couple of years is even the collection of sustainability data with the National Farm Survey, which is highlighting, yes, it's highlighting there's a journey to go, but it's highlighting where the trends in actions are starting to be positive in terms of whether it's low emission slurry spreading application, whether it's what we see in terms of the trends in terms of EBI progression, or all of these things which are helping in terms of the overall emissions. So, highlighting what's good on farms, I think going back, I suppose, the development of the MAC and the ongoing development of the MAC. We have our third iteration of the MAC in play now, and it won't be the last one. But that's really important in terms of something that is that technology list in terms of what is on the shop shelf in terms of what is an option there for farmers to consider. Together with AgNav, then what impact will it have? But the MAC, there's two key components which I think are really important to emphasise about the MAC and the journey that the MAC presents. It is a list of technologies, and it is a list of what the emission potential or the mitigation or the abatement potential of those technologies are. But the MAC will only deliver with uptake and adoption. And that's what we need to cultivate at farm level, is the buy into the challenge and and help them then and support them in terms of the adoption and the uptake. And that's where and that's where the advisory support and the education support is coming around that.
So I worry a little bit about the speed and the accuracy, Stan. So, and what I mean by that is this going to happen fast enough? And in terms of accuracy, so there's no entity in this room, be it a company or government organisation, is operating without a database of their customers or their clients. And really you need to be targeted and everyone wants to get closer to their customer. Everybody wants to influence them, give them the data and the information the way they want to consume it. From Teagasc's perspective, are you segmenting farmers? Surely there's low-hanging fruit. I'd imagine Gillian wouldn't be on that list because she's done an awful lot already. Yes, she needs to improve, and there's hundreds of farmers like that, but there's other cohorts of farmers that have an awful lot of work to do. Are we segmenting farmers?
Look, there's no doubt. You could slice and dice all of that in terms of the farmer demographic a number of ways. You can look at maybe where the various sustainability or emissions challenges would be by enterprise. You can look at, you know, and I mean, Barry referenced the tillage sector. You know, the tillage sector as a sector, if you look at emissions metrics per hectare, is already in a very good position. You know, yes, there's work to do, but it's in a very good position on an absolute emissions level. Whereas you look at maybe the livestock sectors, you know, with challenges around you know methane being a big part of the inventory and so on, have more to do. So different enterprises have different challenges. There's also challenges in relation to. I think we need to accept not all farmers are the same. You know, they have different social interactions. They have different. They have different styles of farming. They have different styles of engaging with information. They have different usage levels, engagement with media or so on. They have different engagement with advisors. So we need to be targeting those in different ways. But certainly, I think in terms of our approach, going back to the signpost advisory programme and where we're certainly starting and focusing on farmers who I suppose we would recognise as being the low-hanging fruit in terms of the larger end of the emissions wedge. You know, because there are some farmers who are contributing very little to their overall greenhouse gas emissions. Some are contributing a lot. We're certainly starting there and working through discussion groups, particularly in the early stages. But we need to reach a lot of farmers, and we need to work both in how we reach our own clients, how we work with private advisors to reach farmers using their advisory services, how we work with all the industry partners who are hugely influential with farmers as well. I mean, advisors have a role on a farm. Teachers have a role with students, but there are so many other influencers in the sector that are there and have a huge bearing over the farmer's individual, whether it's a purchasing decision on an input, whether it's decision on whether a new technology is taken up or not. All of those are influencing farmers in terms of their decisions as well, and that's where the network we have for going back to the signpost programme and the network of partners we have in that is helping in terms of that consistency of message, that consistency of approach, that at least everybody is on the same page in terms of the type of direction we need to help farmers move in, and that's where we're going in terms of the overall conference piece.
Thanks, Dan. We're running out of time, so I just want to ask a few more questions if we can. So, Barry, there's a change in rules on the layback in terms of sheep and grazing stubbles. That was in the Farmers' Journal last week. I think that's changing the goalpost slightly. It contradicts your proposals of looking for synergies between enterprises. You know, how do your members feel about that?
Yeah, it was rumbling on there for a while. I suppose the rule came out, and it probably upset a lot of people that want to put in cover crops. And let's say the people that are putting in cover crops are more the progressive farmers who are going to be more carbon efficient. So it was an antagonism for them to put it in. I suppose, just to put it bluntly, there was farmers wanting to put in cover crops coming into agri-retailers around the country, and they were told of the rule, and all of a sudden they just walked out. So it was an opportunity missed. Yes, it was reversed, probably too little too late, really, because 2 weeks in August or 2 weeks in September is worth 1 week in August in terms of cover crops. But I suppose it's a real point of the policy coming out without maybe understanding the implications that it could have. It's, in the grand scheme of things, it's not a huge one, but at the same time it will distort the livestock trade of sheep coming from the west of Ireland over to cover crops in the east of the country. But again, it goes back to the overall thing. We probably need to have a more holistic approach in how our policies are rolled out. And to touch on a bigger policy, like there was a headline in the Farmers Journal today about safeguarding the tillage sector and potentially an arable payment based on its carbon credentials. Like, that is essentially what is needed to safeguard that industry. Like, Stan has said it, and it's been mentioned a few times, that the tillage sector is the most carbon efficient sector in the industry, and we can't let it afford to slip away. So we need to safeguard it with probably at least incentivising it, encouraging the movement, encouraging other farmers to engage with the tillage sector, and try and promote the native grains that we have in the country. You know, the AgNav, it's a great tool, and it's targeted at the sectors that probably need it most. But it would be good, in time at least, if we could include, I suppose, a figure for native grains. So as a livestock farmer will lower his greenhouse gas emissions, or at least improve his score, if he utilises more of the native grains. And that will create a more vibrant tillage sector and a more circular economy, which is essentially what sustainability is.
Perfect. Thanks, Barry. Gillian, I'm not going to be happy leaving the stage unless we go through some of the things we discussed in preparation for you. You talked about research and low-hanging fruit and opportunities. Can you go through some of them and share them with the audience?
Sure. I love the way that we mentioned low-hanging fruit quite a number of times, because when normally it's said in relation to farmers, it was actually low-hanging fruit in relation to industry and policymakers. And the reason I'm just going to touch on this is because farmers have, when we talk about the MAC curve works only with maximum feasible uptake of all measures. And that's a massive challenge. So in order to get that, that means we have to get every farmer, all their neighbours, everyone in the discussion group all getting on board and getting engaged with the mitigation measures. But in my experience, as somebody who's taken on maybe an early adopter or whatever, in terms of mitigation measures, there's three very specific examples where industry, low-hanging fruit, as I said, where industry and policymakers could fix this, and it will absolutely improve uptake of mitigation measures. And firstly, it would be the supply, a consistent and quality supply of seeds for reseeding. So in terms of the last couple of years, we've seen farmers who are obviously, you know, utilising the likes of red clover, white clover, multi-species swards, but and we're seeing the quality seeds coming in. Sometimes they're a little bit questionable. Sometimes I've noticed some amenity varieties that appear in seed mixes. And at the same time, we do not have a database, a recommended database for red clover varieties, which again leads to maybe potential varieties coming in that may not be suitable. And when farmers have a chance to reseed, it's generally once in 10 years. We want to do it right, and we want to be successful, and we want to get the clovers in there. Secondly is around the availability. Again, it's the blind availability of a post-emergence weed spray or a pesticide, herbicide that is clover safe. Over the last 3 years, it's on an emergency license, and the supply has been very inconsistent. On our own farm, we find we have to, when we find it, we end up, bulk buying it. Then, when we run out, we're going merchant to merchant to find it. For other farmers who don't do that, if they don't have it, they're not going to be using a clover-safe post-emergence herbicide. They're going to be using whatever they can get their hands on. So, in other words, they're putting in the legumes, they're spraying them out after 6 weeks. So we have to sort out this. We have to sort out a consistent supply of a post-emergence clover-safe herbicide. And the third one is labelling. When we have Teagasc Johnstown Castle doing all the trials on protected urea, coming up with a database and a list of protected urea products that farmers can use, and a farmer goes and makes the decision, I'm going to use protected urea, and they ring up the merchant, and protected urea lands in the yard, but that protected urea hasn't gone through the trials at Johnstown Castle, and it is not the product that farmers are told about in all these KT sessions. That product will not, and oftentimes does not, perform the same as farmers would expect or have been told with say KT sessions. So when that happens, you have a farmer coming back saying, well, that protected urea is a load of, it's useless, it doesn't work. And that has a ripple effect in terms of mitigation. This is a really important measure, utilising protected urea. If we have a negative ripple effect, it's really going to hamper the progress of uptake of the key measures. So just if we could, there's three low-hanging fruit for industry and policymakers, that is seed supply, clover-safe herbicide, and sorting out labelling around protected urea products.
Perfect. Brilliant, Gillian. I think that really ties in with solutions that are needed. There's people in the audience mightn't agree with you entirely. I'm sure they'll take it up with you later. But availability of seed in terms of multi-species swards, red clover, recommended list, clover safe sprays and protected urea, I suppose labelling around protected urea and fertilisers. So some really good solutions there. Is there any questions from the audience, or do we have time for questions? Yeah, we have one here. Aileen.
Thank you.
Just maybe introduce yourself.
Yeah, so Aileen Barron. I suppose I'm a fellow Waterford dairy farmer, Gillian, so I'm going to put this one to you. Like you mentioned rightly, that you're the only farmer on the panels today, and I had noted the same. But what I wanted to ask you was, do you feel any frustration in what has been expected of farmers? And if you had one wish to go to policymakers with, what would that be? And my second question on that is, do you feel that you have found the formula for other farmers to follow, or is there more?
God, that's a dangerous question, Aileen. So the first one, I would say that if I could go with a wish to policymakers, I would wish that they would follow the science. And I know that there is, controversial decision yesterday. Maybe the science would not back that up in terms of the nitrate reductions that are expected with reducing stocking rates. More so, we see nitrate reductions in leaching. It is down to regional soil-based, actually, soil-based differences across different regions. So I'd love if the science had been followed on that. Do I go around frustrated? Sometimes I find it very frustrating. I find it. What I find is that the lack of clarity as a farmer, when you're drip-fed doom from continually over, it's very hard to make plans. So that's why I spoke about our plan was based. Try to push, just look at policy direction, look at what was going to keep us profitable and happy farming, because otherwise you just, you get out of it. Sorry, your second question was about, do I think that this is the pathway for other farmers to follow? That's, again, dangerous question, systems discussions, I don't know if you've ever been on Twitter for one of these things, it's just magic. So I am, I won't go there, but it works for us because of the land, of the topography of what we farm. It's very, very steep. So we just found a solution that suited our farm and our specific location, but there are different solutions for different farmers. I really feel that it's not a one-size-fits-all.
Brilliant, thank you.
Thanks, Gillian. Any other questions? We have one down the back.
How are you doing? Cathal McCormack from Baltic Ireland. I suppose my question relates to the industry, and as part of the industry, I suppose, I feel that maybe we've been somewhat frustrated in recent years in terms of we feel as if we absolutely want to help farmers to fast track I suppose, towards the goals in terms of environmental efficiencies and environmental targets. So I suppose I'm just wondering, particularly to Stan, how does he feel industry can integrate better, or the systems that are put in place will allow industry integrate better so that we too can help farmers fast track towards their targets. And I'm specifically thinking in terms of AgNav. Like, can the industry fit there as part of AgNav? Can we plug into it so that we're all working and going into one direction so that farmers and we as an industry can hit our targets quicker?
Yeah, no, Cathal, I think you're touching on a point which I was trying to stress already in relation to the recognition that I think we need to have, that there are so many different actors who interact and have an influence over farmers. And when I say influence, I don't mean that in a way which means we just get the farmers to do stuff, but just it encourage farmers, support farmers as well, not just ask them, not just tell them, but actually support them to do it. And I think, that's what we're actually, certainly in Teagasc, with the research we have, and we're trying to get that out as much as possible, not just to farmers, but across the industry. That's why I mentioned the signpost programme and the importance of the network of partners. We're facilitating even, very active space at the moment is various signpost partners coming in looking for specific training in terms of where is the state of the research, or where is the state of the advice to farmers at the moment in terms of actions around greenhouse gases or actions around whatever. That we can be consistent with that we know we're supporting what a Teagasc advisor might be saying, or what a Teagasc teacher might be saying, or a Teagasc specialist might be saying, in a way that we know what's been said, and we can be consistent with that and reinforce that message. And I think that's that's something that we really want to be doing. We have a program in Teagasc on the KT, on the knowledge transfer side, called Connected, which is deliberately designed to be that in terms of a network and a facility there for professionals in the industry to engage with that and have I suppose a more regular contact there. So look, I think we'd welcome that and broadly encourage that. I think specifically you reference AgNav and the plug-in there. As I said, the journey on AgNav, we've developed a working product with ICBF and Borbia and ourselves. The ongoing development that is still very much a work in progress. One thing I'd have to stress, I suppose, is that I mentioned a lot about the benefits of AgNav in terms of data. And having the ease of entry of data on the one hand, but also the right data in there in terms of making assessments and evaluations. One thing that we're very conscious of, and all of the partners in developing AgNav are very conscious of, is the ownership of that data. It belongs to the farmer, it's their data to start with, and therefore anyway, it's used, we're very much engaged with making sure the individual farmer is comfortable where their data goes. But in the context of that, and if that can be respected, there is opportunity there. And we want to maximise the usage of AgNav for the overall benefit of the sector. And once we can do that in terms of the spirit with which it is being developed, in terms of data ownership and so on, there's a lot of opportunity there.
Okay, so you're open to collaboration. Barry, did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I suppose I just want to clarify one thing as well. I'm a farmer as well. I'm not sure.
Well, I was going to do that in a few minutes. I'm a farmer as well, so a part-time beef farmer, albeit.
But just on the question specifically, I suppose farmers at least want to be able to implement sustainable measures on their farms in accordance with industry requirements. But really and truly, if they could implement the measure that's going to make the biggest impact first, and then so on and so forth, if it's delivered in such a way that they can measure their progress rather than 101 things being thrown at them and point number 67 is the most important and point number 10 is the least important, at least if we can kind of identify where the biggest measure or the biggest improvements can be made, I think that's probably the best way to get engagement.
Okay, perfect. We might get another question from the floor in a second. I have been given an extension of 10 minutes, so congratulations. The Minister has just been delayed. But I was going to correct the record, it is in the bio. Barry, maybe you should include it in your bio that you're farming, maybe. But I am one of 80,000 beef farmers, Stan. I'm stitching in clover. I'm by far away from being a very good beef farmer, but I'm proud of what I do. I'm stitching in clover. I've got hundreds of metres of hedgerow thanks to reps. I've a calving pattern of 10 to 12 weeks, depending on if my favourite heifer has gone in calf or not. I'm implementing 100% AI. I'm using sex semen in my heifers. I've got a fairly high stocking rate, I won't say what. And I'm using my contractor's using a trail and shoe. To me, everything that's available, a bit like Gillian, you're trying to implement as much as you can. And I think the appetite is there among farmers to implement as much change as they can, as long as it makes sense and there's a return on investment. Like you as a Teagasc advisor, if you're coming out to me, what are you going to tell me to do? And it goes back to the point of segmenting the farmers.
We could be back to you shortly, William, as a demonstration farm. Yes, you sound like a great job.
Far from it.
But you're highlighting something which is really important. And repeat even what I said earlier. One of the things which is very important is to highlight good work where it's being done. What you've outlined there is a really good example of that. What Gillian has outlined is a really good example of that. And there are hundreds and thousands of others. And that is really important. Now, where do you go from there is obviously a big challenge. It goes back to your question in relation to how do we segment farmers and where do we start and how do we try and influence. We're definitely aware to the fact that there's farmers of different emission levels. We obviously want to be targeting the ones who are making a bigger contribution because they have more to give. They've also more to gain by giving because they're maybe coming from a lower baseline, so the benefits are there, and maybe you know, there's more progress to be made in terms of targeting those. But you know, where do you go or any farmer that's doing it already really well? You know, I think it's important to recognise as well that this is always going to be a journey. You know, we have a target 25% for 2030. We know the target is going to be more than that again, and the journey will continue beyond 2030 towards 2050. We know that there's going to be research in the background. The research is ongoing. Stuff coming through the pipeline, as I say, stuff that will be developed over time. So, I mean, going back to where we started at 9 o'clock this morning with Jack, the first presentation, you know, this is a journey. There is no end game in this. And my own opening comments, talking about sustainability, okay, the sustainability agenda at the moment seems to be all about environment, but sustainability is about keeping going and keeping improving all the time. And so I think for any farmer, whether they're starting from a low base or a high base, what we want to do is to have a facility where they can engage with their figures, see where they are. If there's small things they can do to get them over the very last bit of the line, we want to help them to do that. If they have a lot to do because they're coming from a low base, we'll then start there and pick off the ones that make the biggest impact first and keep going. But that range of farmers is out there. We need to recognise and highlight the successful stories, but there is something there for everyone in terms of development as well.
Okay, so I'm told we're back on schedule. Closing comments, very brief comments from each of you. I'll begin with Gillian.
I guess just to summarise everything I said up to this point is that, you know, if we take anything away from today's session is that you have to first understand farmers and understand their perspective. Transformative change is possible. Look, I'm sitting here as a living example of that. We need to get a pathway is possible to emissions, forward for farmers to emissions reduction through the MAC, yes, but also through peer-to-peer learning is invaluable between farmers. The low-hanging fruit for industry and for policymakers around supply of what I mentioned already around seeds, the herbicides and the labelling of protected urea. And just to finish up and say thanks ever so much because I really enjoyed today's session. Thank you.
Great to have you, Gillian. Thank you. All right.
Yeah, I suppose just to follow on what Gillian was saying there, in terms of research and policy makers, these decisions need to be made based on what way will it impact the farmer, what's practical to implement, and the benefits that can be got from it. In terms of specifically the tillage sector, I suppose in order for us to achieve a sustainable agricultural industry going forward, we need vibrancy in each of the sectors. And we need to safeguard the tillage sector through policy because of the news that happened yesterday. I think it's under serious threat. But we need vibrancy from each of the sectors, and we need joined up thinking from the researchers and the policymakers in how agriculture can achieve these overall emissions, not through tunnel vision.
Perfect. Stan.
Yeah, my concluding remarks would be that I think, first of all, farmers are willing. There's a lot of farmers out there that are already well on the journey. There's a lot of farmers out there understand a challenge, need to understand what it means for their farm and are willing to engage with that. The other thing, and it hasn't been said yet in the session, I think we should call it out and recognise it. In 2022, the results of the inventory showed that our agricultural emissions had gone down instead of up. And that's an important inflection point as well, and we need to keep that momentum going. You could argue how it come down enough, fair enough, but it's trending right at last after going up for so long, and that's really important as well. And farmers are willing to build momentum on that journey. You know, we're developing the enabling tools, whether it's AgNav and the support around it. We need to harness that appetite that's out there to give increased support for farmers in terms of their decision making and support to action those decisions at advisor level, at industry level, and take advantage of all of those collaborations we create. Keeping going in that development of research is really important. That is essentially one of the key ways that we can de-risk this for farmers. If the research is there and the technologies are proven, that's part of the farmer confidence in adoption and taking action, and that's really, really important. The final point that I just would come back to as well is that, and Gillian brought it up earlier in terms of weather patterns and so on, we do have to be very conscious of adaptation into the future as well. You know, and accepting the fact, the reason we're talking about this is because we see these variations in climate and these extremes of weather that Gillian is after mentioning, and we need to be awake to that. That is going to impact on how we farm as well. And so part of the journey we're going to be on is farming in the climate of the future, as opposed to mitigating to try and keep the climate of today, and that's important that we keep an eye on that as well. But
okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. So I'm just going to draw the session to a close. I do want to thank our sponsors. I didn't say it at the start. Alltech, also KeyPack for our lunch. I think your comment, Stanley, is there is an awful lot of great work going on, and that's demonstrated by what Gillian has said. There's a lot done and a lot more to do. Where there's challenge, there's opportunity. I think we need to trust the process. I'm quoting you again, Stan, from earlier on, and to quote and reiterate the point we started with. We as an industry and a sector need to move from the planning process and planning for the future to start creating the future. So please join me in giving a round of applause for our speakers today.